Okay, so I was going to do a short Mystic Spark, Mary Magdalene Part 2, but this is going to be a bit longer because I want to deep dive with you all today. In the first Mystic Spark on Mary Magdalene, we talked about why her story was changed. So to recap and set the stage for today's conversation, let's take a look. So for the last 1,500 years, Mary Magdalene has been remembered through a distorted lens. But the distortion, it didn't come from scripture. It came from the institution that grew around it. If we look closely at the earliest writings and mystical texts, the esoteric traditions that preserve her lineage, a very different woman emerges. She was not a prostitute, and this wasn't a cautionary tale. She was a priestess. She was an initiate and the one who understood Yeshua's teachings with a depth the early church found way too dangerous. So today we're restoring her story, not by inventing something new, but by removing what never belonged there in the first place. So what does scripture actually say? First, let's look at Mary Magdalene as she appears in the canonical Gospels. She's described as a follower of Yeshua, a woman he healed of 7 demons, which we're going to get into, don't worry. A disciple who traveled with him, a financial supporter of the ministry. She was present at the crucifixion when most of the other disciples fled. She was the first to witness the resurrection, the one he commissions to tell the others. And this, amongst so many other reasons, is why she is called the apostle to the apostles. And nothing, absolutely nothing in the text says that she was a prostitute. That interpretation didn't come from Yeshua. It did not come from the early disciples. It did not come from scripture. It came from a single sermon delivered almost 6 centuries later. So, what happened? How was her story changed? Let's look at how this spiritual leader was diminished to a sinner and a prostitute in the time it took for a pope to give a sermon. Okay, it's 591 CE, and Pope Gregory the Great preached a homily that permanently altered Mary Magdalene's identity. In that sermon, he merged 3 separate women from Scripture. He had Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, sister to Martha and Lazarus, and an unnamed sinful woman who anoints Jesus. And what he did is he declared them to be one person, a repentant prostitute. There was no evidence for this, no biblical basis, no historical support. It was a theological invention with a purpose. By turning the female apostle into a fallen woman, her authority was removed, her leadership was erased, women were kept out of spiritual power, and Yeshua's closest disciple became a morality lesson. This reconstruction shaped Western Christianity for more than 1,000 years. And with one sermon, her apostolic authority was erased and she was rebranded into a morality tale. It was one of the most effective character assassinations in spiritual history. And what it buried was her true identity. So we need to go back before the rewrite to understand who she really was. Early Christian communities, especially the mystical and Hebrew Christians, they remembered Mary Magdalene not as a sinner, but as a teacher, a spiritual leader, the one that Yeshua revealed esoteric teachings to, the disciple with the deepest understanding, and the one who comforted and led all of the others after his departure. In the Gospel of Philip, she is the one he loved. In the Gospel of Mary, she is the one who sees what others cannot. And in multiple mystical texts, Peter is jealous of her spiritual authority. The early tradition did not see her as fallen. It saw her as elevated. And when we look at her background through a wider lens, we understand why. Mary Magdalene was a priestess. And it is through this lens that we can understand the true meaning of the 7 demons. So let's back up quickly, because Pope Gregory had something to say here too. Gregory claimed that Mary Magdalene's 7 demons were symbolic of the 7 deadly sins. This is a concept that didn't even exist in her time, and we'll get into what the demons really were, but this allowed him to frame her as a sexual sinner redeemed by Jesus' mercy. And again, that wasn't the reality, it was his agenda. So many lineages, and this is mystical, historical, esoteric, they preserve the memory of Mary, and they recognize that she was trained in priestess traditions long before she walked with Yeshua. She was a priestess of the temple of Asherah. This is the lineage of Isis. Or, depending on the tradition that you look at, she trained as a therapeuti, which is Jewish Egyptian mystics. So these priestess lineages involve deep initiations. This is the kind that we would describe today as shamanic crisis. There's ego dissolution, trauma release, kundalini activation, intense encounters with shadow realms. In the ancient Jewish world, these initiatory upheavals were called demons. This wasn't moral failure. There was no sexual sin, but this was spiritual overwhelm. It's the breaking open of the soul. So the number 7 was a universal symbol for the 7 energy gates, the 7 heavens, the 7 seals, the 7 veils, 7 levels of soul initiation. So when scriptures say she was healed by 7 demons, the ancient audience would have understood that she completed a 7-layer initiation. She passed through the 7 gates of transformation, and she shed 7 veils of distortion to become fully embodied. This is not a stain. This is mastery. Her 7 demons mark her rebirth as a higher initiate, prepared for the role that she would later fulfill. This aligns perfectly with the Magdalene codes. It's a body of teachings that describe the 7 wounds, veils, distortions of power, stages of awakening, and layers of the feminine Christ embodiment. Her healing was the completion of that 7-fold passage. It was her ascension point, not her shame. And when we look at the return of her true story, now after 1,500 years of distortion, we can recognize the Nag Hammadi text that resurfaced in 1945. Her gospel has returned to the world. The Magdalene lineage is reawakened. And now we live in a time when feminine leadership is rising, inner authority is awakening, trauma is being healed, mysticism is returning, the masculine and feminine are rebalancing, hidden spiritual lineages are resurfacing. Mary's story is returning because the world is finally ready for what she embodied. It's finally ready for sovereignty, for direct revelation, embodied divinity, and the union of love and wisdom. Her story was buried, but it was never lost. And now we get to help carry her voice forward through her gospel, her priestesshood, and our own memory, the living lineage that continues to awaken through those who feel called to her.